Hello everyone, I'm Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary. Welcome to this course in our Gradual Desensitization series. This course is going to be about gradually desensitizing snakes to your presence, your proximity, your touch, and your handling through something we call approach and retreat. And part one of this course, which you're about to watch now, is going to be specifically on how to get your snake used to your presence and your proximity. Before we get started, let's review what desensitization means. This is directly from the VCA Animal Hospital's website, and this applies to all species. Desensitization is the gradual exposure to situations or stimuli that would bring on the undesirable behavior, but at a level so low there is no negative response. The undesirable behavior from our snakes, from our point of view, is that they are exhibiting fear, anxiety, distress, nervousness, escape and avoidance behavior, they're freezing or hiding, they're displaying anti-predator or defensive behavior. That's undesirable behavior from our snake as far as we're concerned. We want to make sure that we're gradually exposing them to any situations that are likely to cause that at a level that is so low, it's not working them up to that point. Let me continue. As the animal experiences the stimulus but does not respond in the undesirable way, the animal becomes less reactive to the stimulus, and the pet can soon tolerate a somewhat more intense stimulus without exhibiting the undesirable response. The key to effective desensitization is to first find the threshold at which the pet first responds by designing a stimulus gradient from low responses to high responses, so that the pet can be gradually exposed to progressively more intense levels of the stimulus without the undesirable behavior being elicited. That means that there is a line in the sand, and when you cross that line, your snake is exhibiting fear, anxiety, and distress, that undesirable behavior that I mentioned. You don't want to bring your snake to that point. You want to gradually expose the snake to whatever it finds potentially threatening or scary, until right before they reach that point, and then you want to back off until you can gradually expose them to more and more of that thing they find scary, which is usually us, to be honest. Again, it is essential that the threshold not be surpassed unless the pet can be effectively calmed and settled. So if you are at that threshold where the snake's now exhibiting fear, anxiety, and distress, you don't want to cross that line and keep going. That's when you want to back off and make sure that the snake can be placed in a situation where they're comfortable and relaxed again. Desensitization provides a means of safely exposing the pet to the stimulus at a threshold or at a level below which fear is likely to be exhibited. So you're going to expose them to whatever that scary thing is, but only at a level at which they're not experiencing fear yet. You don't want to go beyond that level. Now I want to review a term we have talked about before, and that's gradual desensitization. And here's my definition of it in regard to your snakes or your other reptiles. Gradual desensitization is slowly exposing your snake a little at a time for short periods of time to a stimulus they find aversive or scary, while making sure they can get away from it, or making sure that you take the stimulus away, or remove the snake from the scary stimulus when they show signs of fear, anxiety, or distress. It is the complete opposite of flooding or exposure therapy. The difference is, with gradual desensitization, you aren't throwing a scary thing at your snake all at once and forcing them to remain in its presence. The snake has the ability to get away anytime they want, or if you see that the snake is becoming too frightened, too anxious, and they've reached threshold, you take the stimulus away if the snake can't get away. But in other words, the snake is separated from whatever it is they find aversive or scary, and that is key to gradual desensitization. If you look at this picture of Soji, Soji's coming out of a tub and exposing herself to this branch. So she has the choice and control to interact with this branch or not. So she can approach the branch, retreat from the branch. She can investigate it as she feels comfortable. If it's something that scares her, she has the ability to get away from it. That's an example of her having control over her own gradual desensitization. So she's free to come out of the tub and interact with the branch as she feels comfortable. And she can get away from it if it's a scary thing, and she needs to get away from it in order to feel comfortable and relaxed. These terms are going to be important to understand as we go through this series on gradual desensitization: presence, proximity, touch, handling, flight zone, flight distance, threshold, approach, and retreat. We're going to talk about most of these in this video. We're going to get more into touch and handling in part 2. In video part 1, I'm going to specifically show you an example of how I use approach and retreat in order to get the snake used to my presence and proximity. Presence just means that here I am in the room with my snake. The snake is remaining visible, comfortable, and relaxed in my presence. So I am physically there, and my snake is physically there, and my snake is not upset by me being present. And that's all we mean by presence. I enter the room, and my snake remains visible, comfortable, and relaxed. Proximity means that now I start to get closer to my snake. So as I get closer and closer to my snake, we would like the snake to remain visible, comfortable, and relaxed. And what we don't want is for the snake to now retreat. We don't want the snake to hide, freeze, become defensive, exhibit anti-predator behavior, or try to get away. In video part 2, we're going to talk more about how we can start introducing touch and handling. Touch just means that the snake chooses to touch us, or the snake tolerates us touching them while at the same time remaining comfortable and relaxed. And handling just means that the snake tolerates us handling them and they remain comfortable and relaxed. We need to define what flight zone and flight distance is. The flight zone for animals means the distance that a potential threat or predator can be from the animal before it causes alarm and escape behavior. So imagine a bubble around your snake, or let's just call it a room. Am I able to enter the room without my snake becoming alarmed and exhibiting escape and avoidance behavior or other defensive behaviors? And once I'm in the room, how close am I able to get to the snake before they become alarmed and start exhibiting escape and avoidance behavior? That's what the flight zone is. It's that area of space around the animal where, as long as you're outside of that area of space, the animal is fine. But as soon as you cross into that area of space, they are not fine. And this includes anything an animal perceives as a threat, like humans. Yes, you, the new caretaker your snake doesn't know or trust yet. And then flight distance is the distance within which a person can approach an animal before it moves away. So now that's us starting to track and calculate how close can I get to my snake before it exhibits alarm and escape and avoidance behavior, or fear, anxiety, and distress, defensive behavior, anti-predator behavior, freezing and hiding, or all those things we don't want it to do in our presence. We want that flight distance to decrease so that we can get near our snake and be in very close proximity and have it remain comfortable and relaxed. So here is my snake in its bubble, in its safe zone, and as long as I stay out of that zone, the snake is cool with it. Here I am outside of that zone, and the snake's fine. It's doing whatever it was doing, and it doesn't see me as a threat, and it's not worried about me. But now I get super close, and the snake decides I'm out of here. That means that I crossed into that flight zone where now the snake is alarmed, and they're going to escape and avoid. I crossed a threshold. What's a threshold? Well, it's the magnitude or intensity that must be exceeded for a certain reaction, phenomenon, result, or condition to occur or be manifested. In this case, it was that line in the sand or that imaginary boundary in that flight zone that I crossed and my snake took off. Animals can be under threshold, which means you haven't crossed that line and they're not exhibiting any kind of fear, anxiety, or distress, or escape and avoidance behavior or defensive behavior. They can be at that threshold where they're like, I notice something here. I'm reacting a little bit to it. It's stretching me outside of my comfort zone. I'm not sure if it's a threat or not, and I need to make a decision. Or a snake can be over that threshold where now they see you or whatever that stimulus is as a threat and they're freaking out. So what does that look like? Under threshold means the snake is comfortable and relaxed, showing no signs of fear, anxiety, or distress towards the stimulus present. There I am. I am the stimulus present. There's my snake above my head, checking me out, coming out of his enclosure, under threshold, not worried about anything. In the middle, at threshold, means the point when the snake shows awareness to the stimulus and goes from comfortable and relaxed to cautious and alert, or begins to react. So now the snake is, something's here. Lori's really close to me. She's really in close proximity to me, and I'm not sure if I can trust her or not. I'm not sure what I think about that. I'm going to freeze for a second, or I'm going to pause for a second, and I'm going to appraise the situation and decide if, she's not anything scary, I can go back to being comfortable and relaxed, or, oh my gosh, she's probably going to kill me, and I need to start freaking out so that I can get away. That would be going over threshold, where your snake is playing dead, freezing and hiding, rolling up into a ball and hiding their head, striking, hissing, exhibiting all kinds of behavior that indicates I'm terrified, I'm way outside my comfort zone, I'm trying to get away because I'm in fear for my life. So that's over threshold. The snake shows signs of fear, anxiety, and distress towards the stimulus. So there I am, and the snake is highly fearful of me, terrified of me, in fact. Well, first, let's make sure we know what fear, anxiety, and distress looks like. I talk about this a lot in my videos, but just as a review, fear, anxiety, and distress can look like escape and avoidance behavior, defensive behavior, offensive behavior, or like this snake is having just stress responses in general. And those are things like fight, flight, freeze, fret, fidget, and hide. Fret and fidget, I'm not sure we've talked about before. It's really obvious in mammals when they do this. It might be pacing behavior or excessive panting, or when your dog just suddenly yawns for no reason or starts scratching, but they're not actually itching. They're fidgeting, they're fretting. In a snake, this could look like pacing. It could look like frantic movement and darting behavior, and just what looks like random locomotion, racing around an enclosed space. That could be what fretting or fidgeting looks like in a snake, or just some kind of repeated behavior that the snake keeps doing over and over. Well, the answer to all of this is approach and retreat. This works very well in many, many cases. Approach and retreat means that you're moving towards the snake until you notice them approaching or at threshold, and then you're backing off in response to their hesitancy, their nervousness, their uncertainty, their fear, anxiety, or distress. And then you approach again when you see that they're comfortable and relaxed again. And then you retreat when they exhibit fear, react as if threatened, or they retreat. So basically you approach and retreat as they approach and retreat. You're going to approach and retreat repeatedly until the flight distance decreases and you're able to remain near your snake while they remain relaxed, ignore you, or even approach you. So I'm going to approach my snake, and if they act afraid at all or freeze or act nervous, I'm going to freeze and stop, or I'm going to retreat. And then when they look comfortable and relaxed again and are just going about their business, I'm going to get closer. And as long as they remain comfortable and relaxed or ignore me and are just doing their normal little snake things, I'm going to get closer again. But if they get scared and retreat or freeze, then I'm going to stop and back off. And we're going to just do this approach and retreat until I can get all the way up next to my snake. And she's looking at me like, hey, what are you doing there? And she's approaching me out of curiosity, tongue flicking at me. And eventually we're going to work up to touch and handling this way. Now let's look at how we use approach and retreat during an actual desensitization session. The video you're about to see is of one of our Python Regis. His name is Barclay. He is a male pinstripe. He is under 1 year old. I'm going to be the one doing the approach and retreat session. And the footage that you're going to see here with Barclay is from session number 2 and number 3 with him. So in other words, you're going to see the second time that I did this with Barclay, approaching and retreating. And you're going to see the third time that I did this with Barclay, approaching and retreating. And then following this, in video number 2 of this series, we're going to talk about how we move from what you see here into touch and handling training. I'm going to show you an example of approach and retreat with Barclay. So he's out invisible. The first thing I'm going to do is take his cage card off, and he remained where he was. So the second thing I'm going to do is unlock his enclosure and take the lock off. Now he retreated, so I'm going to back off. I am going to move away, and I'm going to come back later. And so you have 2 choices here. You can either put everything back, the lock and the cage card, and go away and come back later, or you can leave it as is and then see if his behavior changes and come back. Now his behavior changed right away. So now he's back at the door. So now I'm going to approach again. Now he retreated when I put my hand up, so I am going to retreat again. And I'm going to watch his behavior and see what he does. And I'm basing my approach and retreat on his approach and retreat. So he's approached the door again, but he keeps hiding his head at the bottom. And he's turned away a little bit. So I'm going to wait for him to sort of settle. And there he looks settled. So now I'm going to reach my hand back up again. And now he had a fear reaction, so I'm going to retreat. I'm going to back off. And I'm going to let him decide what he wants to do. And I'm just going to keep doing this until we get to another point where he remains comfortable and relaxed. And then when we get to that point, I'll move on to the next step. And so I just keep doing this approach and retreat based on his approach and retreat and his behavior until we get to the point where he's comfortable with me completely opening the door and then possibly comfortable coming out. Now it's a few minutes later, and I came back, and he was at the door, but I came up and sat about 2.5 feet away, and he hesitated for a minute, and then he chose to retreat. And now he's moving around inside his enclosure. He's not hiding, but he's moving around inside his enclosure. Likely he's making a decision as to how to proceed. If he truly wants to come to the door, if he's going to hide, I don't know. And so I'm going to retreat again, and I'm going to go away. Here we are again with Barclay. Another session. He's at the door. I'm going to take his cage card off, and his behavior didn't change. So I'm going to proceed with taking the lock off. And I dropped it and I removed it, and his behavior didn't change. So now I'm going to go for the door, and I'm sliding it open, and I really want to watch carefully here. I'm sliding the door open, and his behavior hasn't changed. Now he realizes the door's open, and I'm sitting now about 1.5 feet away, and he's chosen to come out. And remember, this was after the previous session where I did a lot of approach and retreat. And he's doing approach and retreat with me. Now at this point where he's coming out, I am not going to approach any closer. I'm not going to do anything except observe him and make sure that he is safe and he doesn't go somewhere where he shouldn't be. And I don't want him on the floor. I don't want him underneath this enclosure stand. So if he doesn't pull himself back up here, then I will intervene. But I don't want to intervene too soon. I want him to make his own decisions. And I want him to have the choice and control to do what he wants until he truly does something that would be off limits for him because of safety reasons. And this whole time, I'm sitting here 1.5 feet away, just letting him get his bearings, explore, and decide how he feels about this whole situation and about me being here. And as long as he's exploring just right here on his enclosure stand and around his enclosure, I am just going to watch him. And I'm not going to get any closer. I'm not going to interfere unless I have to intervene for safety reasons. Hopefully you found that very helpful and that it was self-explanatory, especially since you got to see those actual sessions that I did with Barclay. So what's next? I'm going to show you an example of what we're working up to, what our goal is when we're going from just the snake getting used to our presence to accepting closer and closer proximity to us. And then I'm going to give you a preview of what we're going to go over in part 2 of this video series. So the next video in this series is going to explain how to progress from presence and proximity to introducing touch to your snake and progressing to handling. So here's an example. This snake is out and by the door, and I'm going to approach. And as long as he's behaving the way he is and not retreating or freezing or demonstrating escape and avoidance behavior, I'm going to continue. And I'm continuing all the way to this point where he's clearly coming out. What you've just seen here is our end goal in regards to presence and proximity. We all want our snakes to tolerate our presence, not only in the room, but in close proximity to them, the way that you see Radic allowing me to be here. He's not retreating. He's in fact come to the door. He's remained at the door when I've opened it, and he's remained there even when I've put my hand up to it. Sarek has done the same thing, and this is one of the methods that we can also use to introduce touch and to introduce handling. There's more than one way to do that, and in part 2 of this video series, I'm going to not only elaborate on what you see here, but I'm going to go over another way that you can introduce touch and then eventually handling with your snake. And as we wrap up, I want to point out here that Sarek is doing approach and retreat with me in the same manner that I was doing approach and retreat when I was working on those sessions with Barclay. He's doing approach and retreat and working himself up to coming all the way out and onto my arm. Thank you so much for joining me and for your continued interest in choice-based handling, snake behavior training, enrichment, and welfare. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or you'd like to discuss anything in reference to this course. Until next time, and until you join me for part 2, everybody please remember to always be kind and love your animals.